This session is going to be about our gospel, which is from chapter 10 of Mark. And again, thanks to Jim Owen for taking us through the reading.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage and get up. Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you, Jim. And Mark frames the journey to Jerusalem with the healing of two blind men. The first one was the blind man of Bethsaida, back in Mark chapter 8. We never read that on Sunday, so I'm going to take a look at it right now. If we have time afterwards, I'll show you Felix Yust's webpage, which shows you very clearly this is not read on Sunday, but on the 8th Wednesday of Ordinary Time or something. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands upon him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then he again laid his hand upon his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and saw everything clearly. And he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Now, this was not a popular miracle story. The liturgists who put the lectionary together didn't like it. That's why we don't read it on Sunday. Matthew and Luke didn't like it either. They don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. If you looked at the gospel synopsis, they both omit it. Why? Because it takes Jesus 2 tries to heal this blind guy. And Matthew likes miracles that happen instantly. When Jesus curses the fig tree in Mark, then when they come back the next day, it's withered. In Matthew, when Jesus curses the fig tree, it's like the witch in The Wizard of Oz when water gets thrown on her. It withers immediately. I'm melting. Okay, so Matthew doesn't like miracles like this, or Luke either. But Mark loves this story. Why? Because this story shows the spiritual conditions of the disciples. Remember, I said Mark gives us the most human portrait of Jesus in the New Testament, he also gives us not plaster saints, but the most human portrait of the disciples of all the Gospels. Peter has just confessed Jesus as Messiah back in chapter 8. But when Jesus starts talking about suffering, Peter tells him this cannot possibly be part of God's plan. And Jesus had to tell him, "Get behind me, Satan." In Mark, the disciples are like this first blind man. They've been partially healed. They're seeing, but it's like people, they look like trees moving around. They see Jesus is Messiah, but they don't yet see clearly. So then we get our story for today, the story of Bartimaeus, which is son of Timaeus. The punchline comes at the end of the story. He, Bartimaeus, followed him, that is Jesus, on the way. Now, the way, the Greek word is hodos, and the way out of some place is the exodos. Exodus is the way out. So hodos is the way, was an early designation for the Jesus movement before the word Christian had been coined or invented. We read that in Acts that Saul was going to different places, persecuting anyone who followed the way. That's the Jesus movement. And here he's following Jesus on the way up to Jerusalem, on the way up. That's the place of suffering, death, and eventual glorification. So the frame, Mark sees discipleship as a journey, a growth in understanding of God's plan, a deepening of relationships. From verse 1, the reader knows that Jesus is Christ, the Son of God. Mark 1:1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. But what does that mean for Mark? Mark has no story of a miraculous birth, nor is there even a hint of that in the teaching of Mark. In fact, in Mark chapter 3, Mark portrayed the mother of Jesus as a non-believer, along with the other relatives of Jesus. Last week, the suffering and glorified Son of Man from Daniel shapes Mark's understanding of Christ, Son of God. He's also this suffering and glorified Son of Man. The first human being in this gospel to call Jesus Son of God is the centurion. And he does it after Jesus cries out, my God, why have you abandoned me?" And then he screams and dies. It's a horrible scene. So the passion, the death of Jesus in Mark. And the centurion says, truly, this man was Son of God. For Mark, you can only understand what Son of God means. Human beings can only understand this once they have seen that it's the same one who died on the cross, who will then be glorified. Any other understanding of Son of God is more like the Hellenistic idea of what scholars call, the Greek word is theos aner, a divine male, literally, a divine male. And wonder workers in the ancient world, there were plenty of, like Apollonius of Tyana and so on. There were plenty of miracle stories about plenty of people. And what Mark is saying is, if that's the only picture you have of Jesus, you're like this guy who's just seeing people, but he thinks they're trees moving around. So the first human being is the centurion present at the death of Jesus. And some have asked me, well, what about Peter? Didn't he call Jesus the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God? And my answer is not in Mark. That's Matthew. And that's why it's important to keep your gospel straight. So at this point, I'll ask Mary Ellen to come and to, this will be the Revised Standard Version.
Yes. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude.
Somebody has theirs on, and that's giving you feedback.
Okay, so we'll leave it. Okay, I'll start again. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great multitude, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, rise, he is calling you. And throwing off his mantle, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Master, let me receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Okay, so does anyone have questions, comments, or observations?
One thing that I had never really thought about before is that line that says, if the disciples were like the blind man, they had been partially healed, but they still had not seen clearly everything he was trying to point out to them. I think that, you know, on the surface, that's not much, but really that's pretty deep.
So Jim Owen said that he appreciates the point that the first blind man that was healed is representative of the disciples, that they were seeing, but not clearly. And at first it seems simple, but the more you think about it, it's pretty deep. Okay. Did I get it? Okay. Mary Ellen.
This has particular hit me closely because for the past 2 weeks or so, I've been following one friend who is taking the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, the 200-mile journey.
Okay. So a passage hit Mary Ellen. She has a friend who right now is making the 250-mile long pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain right now. So this is what's particularly struck her.
And another friend on the Appalachian Trail.
Another friend on the Appalachian Trail.
So here's Jesus walking and taking a group, a pilgrimage.
So Jesus is walking, taking a group on pilgrimage up to Jerusalem.
So just the physical aspect of it is really, we are pilgrims, we're marching, we're doing the same thing. So that's what
Okay, so this ties into we're pilgrims, we're marching, we're doing the same thing. And hearing Mary Ellen's story reminds me of the time when I was in Israel and I ended up walking to Jerusalem. And I had a friend who had a meeting in Jerusalem, took me to where I thought was about 18 or 20 miles. And it turned out to be more like 28 miles. And, but anyway, I walked from like 3 in the afternoon till about 8 the next morning. I laid down on a picnic table somewhere in the middle of the night for a couple of hours to catch my breath. And, but the physical sensation of walking and going up to Jerusalem, the last part was a climb, I want you to know. And so there's something to be said about walking and journeying as part of spirituality.
And also, we are witnessing a lot of people walking from South America to something better life. All of those people coming through Africa into Europe.
So the contemporary refugee system in the world, people walking from Africa up to Europe, people walking from South America all the way up here, making a pilgrimage to what they hope is a better place. You know, and our official Catholic teaching, whether you or I agree with it or not, but our official Catholic teaching is on the side of the immigrants. It's basically they have the right to a better life. And if our standard of living has to decrease a little bit so that they can have a piece of the pie, so be it. That's official Catholic teaching. So often conservatives are very punctual about the sexual teachings of Catholic, birth control, abortion, and so on, but they don't pay very close attention to the official church teaching on immigrants and immigration. By contrast, many progressives are open to the idea of being good to immigrants and the poor, but they think that natural family planning is always completely foolish, and that there's really shouldn't be a problem with abortion or something like that. So I think both sides of the political spectrum can be challenged by the biblical view, And that's also why we can't be single issue voters, because there's no one party that gets it all right. This was 5 or 6 years ago, we had maybe more, I'm getting forgetful as I'm old, but we had someone talking to the priests about social justice. And they said when congressmen are away for the weekend and they come back and they need to get briefed on a bill, get up to speed. And so suppose there's one that has a lot more for food stamps and rental support and good to immigrants and stuff like that. And they'll say, it's a Catholic bill. And every congressman, Democrat or Republican, whether they're Catholic or not, when on Washington, when they're told this is a Catholic bill, they understand that labor unions and immigrants and poor people are going to like this. I think we can be proud of that. And we have to be very careful. Our bishops have to be very careful when they're getting ready to make statements and pronouncements about who ought to go to communion and who ought not to go to communion. When they're thinking about stuff like this, they need to be very careful that we don't lose our Catholic reputation that we can be proud of. Okay, well, I'm going to stop recording here. And if anyone wants to stay and chat, I'm going to stop this.